So, we've talked about how our environment can impact our cultural norms both directly and indirectly, proximal and distal causes of cultural evolution, transmitted and evoked culture. But let's talk now about biological and cultural evolution and why and how some cultural ideas actually become norms. So, how do cultural ideas spread and evolve? Cultural evolution can be understood by looking at biological evolutionary processes of natural selection and sexual selection. In terms of natural selection, biological evolution occurs when certain genes become more common in populations than they were in the past. Through natural selection, in a population, we see increased proportions of traits that offer survival and advantage. Natural selection requires three things: individual variability within a species for a trait, variability associated with different survival rates, and a trait that has a hereditary basis. So think about the antelope. Antelope species can run fast. The faster antelope survive and produce faster offspring, and ultimately the species becomes faster. This is great if they need to be fast, but think about the environment. Fast animals require more calories. So if there are fewer options for diet or food, slower antelope might start to survive and produce slower offspring. It depends on what's required. In terms of sexual selection, selection favors traits that lead to reproductive advantages, like our ancestral attraction for people who look healthy and strong. Nevertheless, what gets sexually selected may paradoxically go against what confers survival advantage. Think about the brilliant tails feathers of a peacock and how they attract many peahens, but they also might attract their hunters to spot them and catch them. Think about what you favor in a potential partner. Humor, art, sensitivity, beautiful hair, skin color, body type, breasts and butts, and even clothing. Do these variables of sexual selection increase fitness and survival? Our attraction to mates are due to things that have evolutionary advantage, create both advantages and disadvantages for survival, and these can be very arbitrary. So when we talk about cultural evolution and biological evolution, there are similarities and differences. So when we're talking about cultural evolution and comparing it to biological evolution, there are some ideas that are similar. Cultural ideas persist longer than others, and that's like higher survival rates. They're also passed along to others, just like higher reproduction. In terms of differences, cultural ideas can be shared, developed upon, and changed, whereas genetics are transmitted vertically, or genetic genes are usually passed without any mutation unless there's an issue. Sorry about that. Cultural ideas can be transmitted vertically, such as parents to child, or horizontally, peers to peer, whereas genes are transmitted only vertically, parents to child. Cultural ideas can be transmitted widely and so very rapidly, whereas we don't need to wait a long time for cultural ideas to catch fire. Genetic changes takes a very long time. And cultural ideas might be non-adaptive or maladaptive, such as the Kuru disease among the Faroe of New Guinea who engage in ritualized cannibalism. In contrast, for genes to change, adaptation is needed. So talking about transmitted ideas around populations, what facilitates the transmission of social and cultural ideas? And there are four things that are talked about in our book: communicability, spread through social networks, emotionally impactful, and mildly violate our expectations. And we can go through these now. So One of the ways of spreading ideas is that the idea must be communicable, passed from one person to another. Communicability may depend on factors such as its simplicity, usefulness, informative value, and social desirability. So we like to share our ideas with others. And we like to share things that we've learned and cool tips and jewels that we learn. Did you know that you can use a staple remover to open a key ring? There are countless helpful ideas on the web. So what have you heard about? What have you been prompted to share with others? Some really cool things that you found, or that you use, or even that you made up, or that you learned from another person. These are those communicable ideas that pass from one person to another and start to become norms. Another way of spreading ideas is through social networks, leading to a clustering of attitudes, creating cliques, groups, networks who are somewhat like-minded. In a study by Cullum and Harton, they tracked attitudes of students randomly assigned to different dorms. And the attitudes clustered according to residences, especially attitudes deemed more important. So new subcultures formed on the basis of ideas that people who regularly communicated. Even people who are lined up alphabetically will become closer to the people in line with them. And later on, we'll talk about this idea of being closer to a person and being around a person in a way that allows them to become friends with each other and influence each other. But the idea here is that people who hang together start to think alike. And we do that even with Facebook. We do that even with how we get our news. We tend to go to places that have the same general idea as we have. And so we start to reinforce our own ideas. But if we're living among other people and getting their ideas, we might start to change our attitudes and beliefs towards their ideas, or them to us as well. Another way of spreading ideas is having ideas with emotional impact, or those that elicit strong emotional reactions that are more likely to be communicated. So we like to share emotions. We pay attention to and share with others stories and legends that prompt emotion and excitement. That is journalism. We don't want to read and hear about things that are very mundane, but we want to hear about those things, and we start talking about them and sharing them with others. This is because people tend to connect with others better when they're experiencing similar feelings, like horror or anger or happiness. And people do come together in more difficult times when they're able to share similar feelings of emotion. We use this a lot in health education when we're trying to change people's behaviors, when we start bringing about things that bring out an emotional impact. And finally, the fourth way of spreading ideas is that they have a minimal number of counterintuitive components. These things persist longer. So we're looking for stories and things that violate our expectations but are not too outlandish. These characteristics may be found in religious works and myths. The Bible has a lot of mundane things and a few outlandish things. So in the book, they talked about Grimm's fairy tales and what people have found to be more successful. They said that Cinderella had 2 or 3 really counterintuitive elements to it, like things that you would never think of, like a pumpkin turning into a carriage. But the idea of somebody being mistreated and then hopefully being found and being able to start a new life is something that people can understand and have this emotional reaction to. They also talked about this story of the donkey and the cabbage, which has about 6 counterintuitive elements, which never took fire. It never was something that was passed on and on. And here on this slide, I have a picture of a zombie. Zombies and vampires and angels and things like that are really, really big right now. And that's because it's something that is out of our realm, but not so much. You know, we all experience fear of an epidemic. We all have fear of of death. We all have fear of what if I turn into somebody who I can't figure out if I'm on the right side or the wrong side of things. And so things like that where the character actually looks human and you can kind of understand it. It has some things that we expect, but some things that might violate our expectations, but not so much that we can't even take it. So that's our third little brief overview, and we'll come back for our fourth one.